Hello, everyone. This is part 2 of the 1930s stream. I was rudely interrupted last time, so I had to log off at the last minute. So apologies for that, and thank you for your continued patience. Let's just do the last part of 1930. So we'd got up to this piece by Avril Burley. Now, if you remember, we saw one of her self-portraits a little while ago, and that was all about I guess kind of Quattrocentro, Renaissance vibes. And there's definitely something of the Renaissance historicist about this, that, of the Leighton vein. And she's moved away this time into this kind of piece. I mean, it definitely reminds me of the Suitors piece that we saw a little while ago. This is called the Spring Poets, and we're seeing this kind of beautiful Italian town and this lovely Madonna, lovely Donna, and she's, I know, carrying clothes on her head, a small roundel of some kind. Maybe they're kind of washerwoman, and that these women are being sung to by two lute players and some kind of rhythm rhythm section, and they look like they're sort of wooing the most beautiful of all of the washerwomen that are there. So it's quite a fun scene. You've got the bridge in the background, the city on the hill above as well. So kind of interesting. So this is something very different to what we've seen from a guy called Simmons, um, and this is a religious piece called "Were You There When You Crucified My Lord?" So again, it's a kind of a reflection on the crucifixion. But there's a couple of interesting pieces there. Just a little bit about Simmons. Born in Hampstead, very Catholic family. Sort of hung out with Whistler and Sargent, studied at Slade, and then spent time in like a monastic order. So he's kind of a bit like a Fra Angelico, something like that. But the piece we see here is very strange. I mean, firstly, let's talk about the viewpoint. What can we initially see? Also, I'm really sorry. This is a piece that deserves a high resolution image, but this is the best I could do from an old auction site. And it's obviously the crucifixion. We're here on Golgotha, but it's actually quite busy. This is the kind of the moment of the raising of Christ. And we can see various groups around him. We've got kind of workers. We've got the group of women that followed him there, and a couple of them are on the floor crying and weeping. And we've got these kind of men with top hats. And obviously that's the top hats start to give you an indication that actually this is not set in the correct time period, but in a pseudo contemporary. I mean, this is done in 1930s. From my understanding, that there were like men in top hats going around, but I'm trying to think if Chamberlain was not someone like that. I think he probably still would wear a top hat. So, but then obviously the steam engine across here as well, rather than the diesel, maybe sets it a little bit earlier than that. But it's a contemporizing of the story. The other thing to note is the very strange perspective. So not only are we placed above the action, we have given this kind of strange fisheye lens style, which bends and distorts reality. But it's kind of it's a very uneven distortion, I would say. You can see moments where, for example, these figures in the center are placed relatively normally, but then there's quite a lot of distortion going on something like this tree, but not so much on this tree. So if it was a full fisheye lens, you would see the kind of equal distortion across the board. So it has a distinct, uncanny strange feeling like we're in a dream or something like that. Added to it as well is the extreme lights and darks of the setting here. So you can see light emanating from Jesus Christ, and everything else surrounded in darkness here. So it's a very intense piece. Now, I think other things to note are these kind of the pulling figures. There are figures almost kind of fully in the shadow. There are also you can see these couple of figures here preparing this other chap for crucifixion. He's about to get nailed across there. But I wonder if it's a the title's kind of interesting. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? There's obviously a famous hymn about that. And I wonder whether it's like, if you see Simmons' work, there's a lot of ecclesiastical, unsurprisingly, pieces, theological pieces, but there's also lots of modern pieces. This feels very Slade to me, It's really is a question of what would you do if Christ was nailed to a cross today? Would you be like the women who have sort of lost themselves here? Would you be a bystander, just kind of standing by doing nothing? Would you be someone bowled over by the intensity and light from him? Would you be the one pulling him up? Would you be one of the stand-in for the Pharisees and the men of society across here? So I think it's trying to kind of place us as one of those people. Who are you? And how do you deal with Christ? I think there's also an interesting comment on maybe industrialism as well. I think as soon as I thought the steam train hidden in the shadows, it made me instinctively think of Ruskin's negative view on the steam train here. So maybe there's something about contemporary life versus the naturalism of the tree, and of course the tree that Christ is placed upon as well. Very nice piece from Simmons here. It has such an unsettling quality though, but I think if you spend a bit of time with it, I think there is a huge amount to unpack and look within. Okay, we've got another Morley piece here, and this is the Grape Harvest. Griffin Hagen had a grape harvest piece a couple of years ago, and I think it was far superior to this, in my opinion. This is very much kind of like Morley in his naturalistic Italianate style. You've got this kind of Italian family, the mama that's feeding the baby here. These lovely poses, I think particularly I do very much admire this pose down here. I guess that's where it kind of transcends normal naturalism, which is kind of like, it'll be someone picking up some grapes. This is a very staged, powerful pose here from Morley, and the finishing is very good. I think you can definitely tell that he's kind of reaching a zenith in his rendering ability here. So again, I think it's a really nice piece, but I do prefer him in his mythic vein. Okay, we've got a couple of rickets now, and the first one is Faust and Mephistopheles. So obviously this is the story of the academic who sold his soul to the devil, and Mephistopheles is the devil. And I quite like this because we've got Faust in the, when we think of Faust, because I always think of something like okay, the two major versions of this are Marlowe's Dr. Faustus and then Goethe's Faust. One, and they're both plays, and one is like much longer than the other. Goethe's is much bigger, much more kind of reconciliatory, and Faust gets saved at the end. That's all about the kind of, Goethe's is much more kind of romantic and focused on the Christian experience, while like Marlowe has him being eaten up and going to hell at the end. So much more kind of savage but very, very entertaining at the same time. And some good lines from Marlowe's one as well. But Faust, this is Faust before he's made the deal, because one of the first things he asks for is his youth back again, and you can see him looking old. And he's he's in his study. He's sitting down. He's slumped over his desk. The light barely lighting up his texts here, and there's a globe on the floor. I mean, it's showing his kind of arcane knowledge, etc. But and there's some good angling here. There's like a triangle of darkness, and he's kind of sitting in the darkness. But who's illuminated in the moonlight? A wisp of smoky shadow next to him. It's Mephistopheles, and he's holding a skull and a rose here. Interesting. It's I mean, I'm not sure what he's going for here in terms of messaging. Maybe about maybe the like mortality of man. You know, I can give you extra years of life, etc., etc. I think this is a nice piece. I quite like it. I love the color scheme. You know, these kind of dark grey, light greys, blues, and Venetian reds here. Very well balanced. And again, this kind of classic Moro-esque format makes it very, very interesting to me. But I would say not necessarily. I'd say this is definitely quite high tier, but not top tier. I did prefer this one a little bit more, which is Siegfried and the Magic Bird. So, again, there's a couple of different versions of the story, but Siegfried, who is the daughter of Sigismund and Brunhilde, raised by the dwarf Mimi, who was then sort of tricked by Mimi into defeating the giant dragon Fafnir, to try and get his hoard. So this is the moment of defeat of the dragon. And when he kills the dragon, he's able to speak to animals, from what I recall. And you can see his blade here, which he's forged by himself. And this is the moment where he's speaking to the bird after he's killed the dragon. I think this is much more Moreau-y and a much more interesting to me. The landscape looks perfectly Moreau. You know, this is just like his Oedipus. But then you've got an interesting version for the Siegfried here. It's him in this kind of, again, it's an interesting pose here. Not necessarily purely classical. You know, there is a sort of pseudo contrapposto from the leg sitting on there. It's a bit of an awkward pose, isn't it? Both legs towards us, spread apart, and he's turned up and looking up. Very strange. I do like the face here again. And actually, the body shape is like it's sort of pseudo heroic, but again, it's like there's something almost Rubens about it. You know, it's everything's a curve, everything's kind of loose, not too much strength to it at all, and he's kind of apathetic at his victory. You know, I always remember him thinking the lines about fear. You know, I haven't known fear. You know, this is the fearless. What's he holding in his hand? That could be, maybe that's the helmet that he has from Fafnir's sword. I could be wrong, or maybe I'm talking about the wrong story. I particularly love this bird here, like this kind of parakeet in pink. We don't see its face at all. We just see the kind of conversation that's going on, and the dragon, which again subtly done, but again I think that's really nicely the evocative nature of the waterfall next to it, evoking the kind of the spilling of blood, etc. But I think this is definitely one of Rickett's top paintings, in my opinion. Okay, Howard Somerville, born in Dundee and studied at University College in Dundee, and then but then came down to London, member of the Chelsea Arts Club. So that kind of set. I would describe him as like an Edwardian portrait painter. This is towards the end of his career, really, and he did this kind of piece which stood out to me. I would describe it as this, interwar realism thing, a bit of the kind of Meredith Frampton sculptural modernism that I go on about. Um, the background there's definitely some kind of Orpen in there as well. So I think he's kind of updating his style. He's pulling in from all over the place. But I thought this is a particularly lovely portrait from him. He's got the sitter sitting on a cushion in the room, kind of slumped over a little bit, but looking out. I think whenever you got a slump like that, it's obviously not the most flattering, but it does give you a chance to do something a little bit more casual. And I think it's a little bit fun and a little bit flirty, this painting. He's got her holding a fan, she's got a shawl, she's been at her dress. That the hands for me kind of signal confidence, ease, come over here. They're kind of almost like welcoming. And then she's looking to someone or maybe looking away from you. So, she wants to be desired. She's desiring someone else at the same time. So there's an interesting story there. The rendering of the fabrics is decent. I would say that obviously nothing on like Dixie, and you can see there's an Orpen-esque take on the cushion here, but there's a little bit more detailing in this shawl, which I thought was very nice. And the fan in particular, I think, is very lovely. So really nice painting there. I think really captures her spirit. Okay, Gerald Kelly. Again, I mean, this is kind of showing that I think that portraiture has really moved on, if I'm honest with you. Kelly's kind of relatively young, born 79, so how old is he now? He's about 50 by now. I would say one of the big portraitists of his day. He did actually end up president of the RA in the 50s. So again, so I think this is kind of him. He's a relative youngster for his age in the RA. So let's have a look and see what's going on here. I think for me this is kind of showing the influence of Frampton. Really, I think he really has sort of shocked the system a little bit in terms of the kind of casuality, and again, Orpen is definitely involved in that as well. But again, there's this interesting kind of realist view on the portrait painter. Her hands are kind of casual here, maybe a bit of anxiousness across here, but also welcoming, just confronting us, but also welcoming at the same time. So I think it's just a nice, lovely portrait. It would be good to see the color version of it, but still very nice. Okay, something very different here from Colin Gill. Now, Gill, yes, he is actually the cousin of Eric Gill, another Slade boy, but spent a lot of time in Rome, spent some time as a war artist. I would just sort of describe him as like attached to the war modernists. So think of Nash, think of Wyndham Lewis, etc. Sort of pseudo attached to those guys, but a little bit more figurative, really. He's really a color man when you see it. But by this time, I think he's sort of adapted to what's going on in France. Really, if you think that the Exposition d'Art Décoratif is 35, which is really like Dupar's big like moment in the sun. This is 7 years later, really. This to me feels like he's trying to reconcile some of his earlier styles with the French Deco. Also, I would say maybe a little bit of De Chirico in here as well. This kind of the background for this for me feels very De Chirico. So it's not Aphrodite as I initially thought when I first saw this. This is Amphitrite, who is a goddess in her own right of like rivers and fishing, basically. So she's kind of like a, I don't want to do her down, but like a female Poseidon here, and she's skewered a fish. It's kind of like a classical piece slashed pseudo surrealism, really, isn't it? If you think about it, where you've got this like town scene going on. Illusions of kind of fishermen and fishing, but they can't see here at all. The wind kind of blowing down and um, gusting the entire city, and you can see the kind of towels in the window floating across. Really was captured by this piece. I think this is. I mean, I quite like Colin Gilbert in general, but I thought this piece was really interesting, and also interesting. It sort of got by the RA censors. I mean. One thing I would note is it's interesting how Wyndham Nash and those kind of post-war, more extreme modernists didn't get didn't really get any coverage in the early years of the RA, even though someone like Philpott did. And I think it's sort of like their attitude, where Wyndham Lewis is very much influenced by the Italian futurists, which are fundamentally anti academic, while I feel like Gill is trying to he's trying to reconcile um, what the extreme modernists have unleashed, but also in an academic style. And again, yes, there's hints of something surrealism here. Yes, there's hints of um, deco in this of Dupin in here, but I mean it's very figurative still. I look at the detailing on the knee and the leg. I think is very very beautiful. So it's more structured in kind of classical traditions, and actually in Roman traditions. You know that the pose, while itself is surreal, I feel like it could be taken from one of the walls from Heracleum or Pompeii, for example. Very nice from Gill. Speaking of Frampton, okay, I've got the world's smallest picture here, so apologies. Sir Henry Wood. I mean, I think one thing I would say is I think portraits are so difficult because some portrait artists have a very unique style, and it's like you're getting the same thing every single time. We get that a little bit with Frampton, but we must forgive him because I think he is just so unique and interesting at the same time that it's just a good. He's just a great portraitist, but I feel like this is very much the same style, so I won't dwell on it too much. This is kind of interesting. This was a Rankin painting. Rankin, another Scott. I mean, Scott's definitely over-indexed in terms of high quality art. I think, yeah. Another Slade boy, but relatively early. And this is actually towards the end of his career, if I recall. Again, he's sort of more like an Edwardian, updating his ideas. Kind of interesting that again that some of the older boys have gone through various phases, and they're trying to understand this new landscape and to find their place within it. This kind of painting was kind of interesting because I really liked the sitter here. I thought she was really really beautiful, Lady Mary Lygon. This kind of long Norman face here, the kind of lovely 20s hair, summer dress, and there's something he's definitely being inspired by someone like Bloomsbury guys. If I'm honest with you, look at this kind of urn in the background, very Vanessa Bell, very Duncan Grant, I think, but yes, there's an impressionistic quality, but there's also lots of realism going on here as well. Much tighter than any of the Bloomsbury guys would ever dare to paint, and also not trying to kind of think about perspective or color. This is the colors are actually very real, but also kind of it's a very tight color palette as well. The lady's sort of going for a stroll. There's I guess that's the ha at the back of the estate, and she's kind of looking out relatively nonchalantly. But again, there's a little bit of interest in business going on with her hands there, pinching the fabric here. Maybe a bit of interest. Maybe she's seen someone. Maybe she's an old lover, or together with his new love. I think there's a bit of interest with this portrait that makes you think about who's she looking at, and again, we're sort of not really in dialogue with her, but we're kind of viewing her from the garden party as well, which I quite like. Okay, and here's another. We've had some good portraits this year. This is George Hall Neils, born 63, so he's in the 60s No, 70s by this point. Actually, he died in 40, so another 10 years. Liverpool-based painter. Not a huge amount to say on here. I think he's got a few bits covered in some of the Liverpudlian galleries. I would describe this piece as, I mean, there's a little bit of open, definitely a lot of lavery in here as well. So again, maybe a little bit, leaning on. He's not really a pioneer in that sense, but this was of the composer Cyril Scott. I really loved it though. I thought this was a very captivating piece, just in terms of just capturing the sitter here. There is a deep intensity, a thoughtfulness, an ability in his pose and in his brow. Yes, there's a little bit of staging here, like who kind of sits like this and writes out at the same time. But I think that is you have to forgive the artist to kind of show and signal what the sitter does. I quite like this portrait, this sculpture in the background here. These two figures, which have kind of been mushed up impressionistically, so we can barely understand what's going on. It's not drawing away from the figure, but it's giving a little bit of balance in the composition. Some really good shading here, where there's the kind of the darkness and the light coming out of him, but then also a secondary light source coming like quite intense. Really, the values in this are from darkest dark to whitest light here. Really quite extreme. But I think for me, best of all is the colors here. Just these beautiful. The purple of the quill is just like, wow, what an amazing shot of color there. So brilliant. And then this lovely, almost bluey purple in deep indigo here, and the blue kind of sits through in the clothes and the fabrics. This is very the purple of the desk here. This is very purple orientated color. Purple is hard to master, I think, as a color. But he does it without, like, for example, I hate mauve. I think mauve is one of the most disgusting purples ever created. Never goes into mauve. Always sits with the right purples, but adds a lot of depth. But then this is where the sculpture's genius, because it's giving him a counterpoint. The green patina is sort of balancing the purple as well, so it's very satisfactory. Interesting how he hasn't put in a bit of yellow here. He's gone for a very pure lead white here. So I think it's for me, this is a color piece, but it's also just really captured the man in a very distinctive and interesting way here. Okay, this was really interesting. I thought this was a Charles Jagger piece, and it's of the Virgin Mary. So I want to apologize. This was one of the best pictures I could get. But when I was researching, the original entry was for this Mary on the right-hand side. But when I was finding out about it, it was actually part of a full set of figures with Christ across here. And this sort of blew me away, really, because Jagger is obviously just mainly associated with war memorials, but also I would say, okay, Jagger's war memorials are good. They're great. They're probably like the gold standard of war memorials. But I really like his when he sort of moves out of that into more anthropomorphic figures, like the what's it called? The IPI building ones, like the ICI, the chemicals building near the South Bank. Very, very powerful figures. When he's in the kind of allegorical symbolic space, really, really interesting. I would say basically genuine masterpieces, some of Britain's greatest sculpture. Interesting to see him in the theological vein. We saw one of his portraits, just going back a second, was okay. I think he's a decent portrait. This is him in the theological. I think the Mary here is decent. She's kind of looking up, crying out at the same time. I need to see this face to face, I think, to really do it justice. But obviously, this is not the entry. But the Jesus for me was just like phenomenal. I absolutely love this Jesus, mainly because he kind of looks like he's sort of wrapped up with rebar here. He's kind of taking some of the war memorial pieces here and putting it into his Jesus. I thought the Jesus was like, wow, that instantly captivated me. there's something really powerful. This is like a muscular. This is muscular Christianity. This isn't your kind of emaciated Christ. This is a powerful Anglo Christ, the god of empire, the god of empire. I thought this was brilliant. So um, for me, Reed Dick does Mary way better, but Jagger's Christ there, phenomenal. But I'm gonna try and visit this work one day and take a look at it face to face and see what it looks like. Okay, Pegram, we haven't heard from him for a little while. Like Pegram's just so strange. He's just sort of off doing his own little thing. I feel like everyone else in the entire academy has moved on. He's just carrying on doing his thing. This is Archangel Gabriel here. I mean, the piece itself, at first, is kind of like, oh, the drapery's not amazing. The pose is a little bit strange, but what captivated me was the wings again. I think just like Pegram's, he just started out in the kind of Thornycroft academic vein, but then is sort of pioneering his own thing here, and ends up in an almost kind of surreal, quasi-Byzantine place with some of this stuff. I'd love to see this in the round. I think they've taken a very poor quality, poor angled shot here, but I thought really interesting, and again, definitely one of his better pieces as well. Like Pegram does go to really interesting places. I think it's easy to kind of initially like write him off as this kind of more boring Renaissance revival sculptor, but I think he does go out there sometimes. So I quite like this. Okay, Genesis by Anne Duncan. This was a absolutely wild piece. I could not find a color version of this. You just know that this is going to be an absolute banger color-wise. But again, this was another really interesting piece. Again, I just want to apologize for the photo I took of this, which you can see half of this is flipping blurred. I'm sorry. Apologies. Couldn't find much about Duncan, if I'm honest with you. She's it's quite difficult to like that because her name's so generic. So if you know anything about it, please do say. But this is another one of these kind of like interesting modernist reconciling with the academic academy pieces, but definitely a bit more out there. Genesis, I imagined this almost as like the first birth. We've got this kind of like desolate landscape here, a single woman, and she's holding up this child here. And I just can't help but feel that this is kind of like the moment of Cain being born or something like that. The landscape is just absolutely wild, just so beautiful. Rocks protruding. There's a sense of desolateness to it, and you're asking like, why is this nude woman sitting in this place? It's just so rough and rude compared to the kind of sculptural beauty of Duncan's Eve here. But the contrast just really sets it off. I want to talk about the pose here as well. Yes, okay, something like childbirth is just so debilitating to women. I've seen two children being born, and obviously it's a physically intense thing for the woman, but that moment afterwards is it's like a moment of euphoria. It's like it's kind of like the pain of having something of like an arrow taken out of you or something, the joy of it taken out of you, sorry, I should say. And this is it. This I think just shows the kind of the pain and anger of childbirth. But then that moment of elation, she holds up her beautiful child, the one she loves so much, the one that she's going to protect and nurture throughout that child's life there. She holds it up to the earth to show, look what I have made. Isn't it good? I just think it's just beautiful. Love the rendering on the figure as well. Really interesting, and the pose is great. Brilliant. Thank you, Anne. Okay, something a little bit more mellow here. This is our Welshman. Notice Goscombe John now with a Sir here. Sir Goscombe John. Very, very good, sir. Model of a bronze plate in the Swiss church in London. Like, I think the piece almost kind of feels like anachronistic now in the 30s compared to some of this intense modernism that's coming through. But I did really love the figures here. Again, very much Quattrocentro, or maybe this is almost Gothic here on the right hand side, I think. Women seated straight on. Look at the beautiful fabric, the rendering, the lovely flowers in this kind of plaque here as well, and then a lovely face here as well. Like obviously it's a memorial tablet of some kind. We don't know who it is from the. I guess there's a letter writer that does all the lettering bits. But I thought this figure on the right hand side was truly excellent. Very much early Donatello. I was instantly thinking that's what he's trying to go for. This kind of early Renaissance, maybe some kind of Gothic pieces in light relief. Light relief can be really tough, especially these kind of face-on pieces. But he captures the perspective beautifully. You instantly bought in, and I really like the overall effect for this piece. It works with the kind of modern figure. Bear in mind this is someone from the 30s, so nice. Speaking of Reed Dick, I mentioned him earlier. Who I think is our premier sculptor at this time. This is Eileen. It's kind of like an interesting portrait. Like we've seen a lot of Reed Dick's Mestrovichian structured sculpture. This is a little bit more loose, a little bit more playful. It's a portrait of a woman. Just look at her hair at the same time. It's kind of tossing around chaotically. It's not structured at all. I mean, he captures her beautiful swan-like neck. I mean, it's all about her profile as well. Look at that beautiful long nose there. Gorgeous woman, but very stern at the same time. Very, I mean, it's an interesting balance between the chaos of the hair and the structured order, the kind of almost scowl on her face as well. Really nice piece here from Reed Dick. Unsurprising, a great portrait. Would like to see it in the round. It's hard to see the hair as well with this picture as well. Okay, here's something a little bit interesting. This is from Richard Garby. I need to know how to pronounce his name. We've seen Garb having a few, like I would describe him similar to Macmillan, Wheeler, that kind of new medieval modernist, still within the academy, but they're trying to push shapes and figures, etc. This is the mummer. A mummer's usually like involved in kind of pantomime or like mask playing. I'm pretty sure this little thing on the top here is a mask. I mean, Garb is interested in masks. He does a series for Royal Dalton, and I did wonder whether this was a ceramic piece, but I feel like it must be carved. You can tell something's ceramic because it has to be glazed, and then you lose some of the edges because the glaze is kind of like maybe like a 2 or 3 mil layer that goes all over the top, so you get this kind of softening on the piece. Well, this definitely has some kind of strong lines and structure, and Garb does do a lot of his what am I saying, like stonework, ivory work, etc. The mummer sits, so it initially looks like it's in the round piece, but then there's definitely some foreshortening on the foot for some reason. This is all about angles and structures as well. So look at the leg, verticals there, horizontals, triangles, horizontals in the arm. But I love this, like the mask, the face in profile, just looking off in the distance, and then the monkey looking at us. You know, those that look a cheeky trio here. This piece was really captivating, really interesting. You're asking questions about who the figure is, what's he doing, where's he looking off to. Lovely little piece here, one of my favorites from Garb, actually. And we're going to finish off with an absolute banger from Proctor here, Night and Evening. I mean, we've seen a lot of these symbolic pieces taken up. This is kind of like deco symbolism at its finest. We've sort of seen this with someone else. I can't remember who it was, where we had like the dusk and evening. Those kind of the two girls close together. This is Night and Evening redone again. Let's talk about the format. It's a long, slim piece. you're immediately thinking of Burne-Jones, Knopp, who I think were inspired by the kind of Japanese style long format pieces here. But it works really well for this because you've got the two women arms wrapped around each other, and you can tell that I'm going to say Night's the dark hair, and Evening's got the kind of bit of gold in her, you know, from the sun still being around. Night actually has kind of like darker skin here, and she's holding up a flaming torch. Evening, eyes closed, a bit more kind of milky pale. I mean, the women themselves are so beautiful, but I love the kind of allegorical nature of it. This is all about lines and curves as well, though. Look at the he's really emphasized the curves of Evening's body across here, but then he's kind of countered it with some not necessarily horizontals, but a bit of movement across here with the fabric, and then the horizontals with the arms, and then the hair, bit of parallelism as well across the piece. In terms of colors, it's all about these kind of whites, greys, bit of like darkness coming from behind there, but then a couple of shots of color in terms of the yellows and the orange. Really nice from Proctor. I think it does put him out there as one of the better symbolic painters of the time. Okay, that's it for part 2. I'm sorry, guys, about the cutoff last time. I'll try and make sure it doesn't happen. Okay, what was my picks for this year? It's got to be Philpott's Creation of Man, maybe the Russell Flint Silver and Gold, maybe the Simmons. There's something a bit grotesque about that Simmons at the same time. And I'm going to put down that and Duncan Genesis in there. If anyone has seen the color version of that, please send it to me because I bet that's absolute. But it's really, really good to see that. Okay, we're on to 1931, so I will see you next year. Farewell.